Today, are rate rises a certainty in Australia? Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. One of the key questions for the country is whether interest rates, which have been rock bottom for about a couple of years, are set to rise. The RBA has been saying not until 2024, but have slowly been changing their tune. And the Fed lifted rates last week, and markets now think 50 basis point rate hikes are on the cards in the US. The truth is, markets are banking on significant rate rises over the next year or two. The ASX 30-day Interbank cash rate futures implied yield curve is at 2.675% in August 2023, remembering the official cash rate is currently 0.1%. This would see mortgage rates up by as much as 3% or perhaps close to 5%. That would be a horror show for many borrowers. To show you what I mean, and using the CBA rate calculator, I took a typical 30-year $800,000 mortgage, a not unsurprising sum given current house prices, at a cheap 2%, and their monthly payments on interest and principal loans would be $2,957 per month. The total interest charged over the life of the loan would be $264,505. Now, if we increase that to 3%, the monthly payments would rise to $3,373 a month. That's an increase of $416 a month, or a rise of 14.1%. And the total interest paid would be $149,715 higher over the life of the loan, or it would reach $414,220, which is a 56.6% increase. At 4%, monthly payments rise to $3,820 per month, and that's an increase of $863 a month, or 29.2% from the 2% baseline that I started with. The total interest paid would be $310,452 higher, or $574,957, which is 117.4% more compared with 2%. At 5%, they would rise to $4,295 per month. That's an increase of $1,338 a month, or an increase of 45.2%. And the total interest paid would be $481,542 higher, comprising $746,047, which is 322% more than at 2%. So my point is this: households are sensitive to potentially rising rates. Now, there is also a broader context here too. As Peter Martin, the visiting fellow at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University, wrote in The Conversation, the biggest question relating to the management of the economy right now has nothing to do with next week's budget. It has everything to do with the Reserve Bank and the board meetings that will follow it. The question facing the board, the biggest there is when it comes to how the next few years are going to play out, is whether to hike interest rates just because prices are climbing. On the face of it, it seems like no question at all. It's widely believed that that's what the Reserve Bank does mechanically. When inflation climbs above 3%, it's currently at 3.5%, the board hikes interest rates to bring it back down to somewhere within the bank's target range of 2 to 3%. It's what it did the last time inflation headed beyond its target zone in 2010. But the inflation we've got this time is different, and failing to recognise that misreads the bank's rationale for pushing up rates and what it is likely to do. Inflation, it is, but not as we've known it. The Reserve Bank does indeed target an inflation rate of 2 to 3%. The target is set down in a formal agreement with the Treasurer, renewed each time a new Treasurer or Governor takes office. Just about the only tool the bank has to achieve its inflation target is interest rates. If interest rates is below the target, it can cut interest rates to make finance easier in the hope the extra money will encourage us to spend more and push up prices. If inflation is above the target, it can push up rates so it becomes harder to borrow and interest payments become more onerous, taking money out of the economy and giving us less to push up prices with. Now, here's how the bank itself put it. If the economy is growing very strongly, demand is very buoyant, and that's pushing up prices, we might need to raise interest rates to slow the economy to get things back onto an even keel. And note the qualifier, if demand is very buoyant, and that's pushing up prices. Buoyant demand, i.e. spending, is most certainly not the main thing pushing up prices now. The main things are beyond the Reserve Bank's power to control. Petrol prices have skyrocketed because of an invasion half a world away. It's also the reason the global prices of wheat, barley and sunflower oil are climbing. Food processors such as SPC say higher oil and food prices combined threaten to push up the price of a can of baked beans by more than 20%. And the price of a set of tyres is set to climb from $500 to $750 because tyres are made from oil. Everything that is shipped and trucked using oil is set to cost more. And trucks and cars themselves are climbing in price because of a global shortage of computer chips. And it might get worse. Last week, China locked down the high-tech hub of Shenzhen, said to be the source of 90% of the world's electronic goods, among them televisions, air conditioning units and smartphones. It reopened the city this week after testing its 17.5 million residents for COVID. So it's easy to see why prices have shot up and easy to see why they might not come down for a while. What is harder to see is how pushing up interest rates to crimp demand, to force Australians to spend less, would do anything to stop it. It's a view Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe seems to endorse. He said this month that what he is on the lookout for is inflationary psychology, the view that price rises will lead to wages rises, which will lead to price rises in an upward spiral. It used to be how things worked. Australians who are old enough will remember when, if they saw something at a price they liked, they rushed out to buy it before it climbed in price. Australians born more recently have learnt, though, not to bother. The old psychology could come back, but wages growth, which would have to be high if that sort of thing was to happen, has remained historically low at about 2.3%, little more than it's been before COVID. And when surveyed, trade union officials expect little more, about 2.4% in the years ahead. It is true that these days most Australians aren't in trade unions, so the Reserve Bank seeks out the views of ordinary households. On average, those surveyed expect wages growth in the years ahead to be just 0.8%, which is next to nothing. The psychology hasn't taken hold. Until it does, it's best to think about most of what has happened as a series of isolated, externally driven price rises that have dented our standard of living. Pushing up interest rates to dent living standards further won't stop them. The Reserve Bank is right to be on the lookout for internally driven, self-sustaining inflation. We will know it when we see it. But he said, we're not seeing it yet. Asked on ABC 7:30 this week whether there was a role for higher interest rates in an oil crisis, a former Reserve Bank board member, Warwick McKibben, said the worst thing a central bank can do in a supply shock or an oil crisis is to target inflation, because by targeting inflation you push downward pressure on the real economy. He went on to say that if the bank did it without success and then kept doing it, it would bring on a recession. Now, I'm sure the bank doesn't want to do that, but then again, we know already banks have been steadily lifting their fixed mortgage rates from ultra-low 1.99% to closer to 3%, and the costs of funds, as shown by bond yields, is rising, making banks needing to hike rates to protect margins. So the tussle between the markets and the bank is going to get really interesting. And for the record, I am expecting some rate movements higher later in the year from the RBA, but not as much as the markets are signalling. Nevertheless, it's worth remembering households were recently reminded by Phil Lowe that they need to plan to hold buffers because rates may well rise, even if such rate hikes don't dampen inflation. And by the way, the third element in all this is employment and, of course, wages growth. If inflation continues to burn bright, it's unemployment that may rise, and that would lead to a stagflation scenario, and that would be good for no man. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.